A betrayed heir, a mysterious fall, and a dog determined to reveal the truth. When all seems lost, an unexpected act changes the destiny of a powerful family forever. The sky over Boston poured intense rain that night, creating a liquid curtain that ran down the windows of the Anderson mansion. Michael adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders as he observed his grandfather's office through the window's reflection. The room, even empty, emanated the imposing presence of William Anderson, as if the mahogany-clad walls held all the secrets of the business empire built over generations. His fingers slid across the polished surface of the antique desk, pausing for a moment on a framed photograph. In it, his mother smiled, young and radiant, in a moment frozen in time. Michael felt a tightness in his chest, thinking about how disappointed she would be if she knew what he was discovering about the family business. In recent months, a growing unease had consumed him. It started with small details, misplaced documents, numbers that didn't add up in spreadsheets, hastily arranged secret meetings. As the company's financial director, he had access to a considerable amount of information, but something told him there was much more happening behind the scenes. Max, his faithful canine companion, a golden-haired mutt he had rescued 3 years ago, followed his steps around the office. The animal seemed to share his unease, sniffing the corners of the room with unusual curiosity. Michael was always impressed by the dog's intuition. Since he had found him abandoned on a rainy night like this one, Max had demonstrated an almost supernatural perception of human emotions. A thunderclap broke the silence of the night, making the windows tremble. Michael took advantage of the momentary clarity of the lightning to examine once again the drawer that intrigued Max so much. It was locked, as always, but something in the dog's behavior made him think there was something important inside. Olivia, his secretary for 5 years, had commented earlier about strange movements in the company's accounts. "Mr. Anderson," she said with her usual discretion, "I noticed some unusual patterns in international transfers." It was another piece in the puzzle he had been mentally assembling. The rain continued its melancholic symphony when Michael finally found the courage to do what he had been planning for weeks. Carefully, he inserted the old key he had found among his mother's belongings into the drawer's lock. The metal creaked softly, and his heart raced when he realized it fit perfectly. Inside the drawer, a yellowed folder immediately caught his attention. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the document that would change his life forever: a will. His mother, before passing, had left specific instructions about the succession in the company. Michael was to assume full control as soon as he turned 25, an age he had already reached 2 years ago. Max let out a small whimper, as if understanding the gravity of the discovery. Michael stroked the animal's head, seeking comfort in his most loyal companion while trying to process the information. Why had his grandfather, William, never mentioned this document? Why did he continue to control the company with an iron fist, treating his grandson as a mere employee? The doubts multiplied in his mind when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, he tucked the will into the inside pocket of his jacket and closed the drawer. The office door opened, revealing the austere figure of William Anderson. The family. Patriarch entered the room with his always dominating presence, but there was something different in his gaze, a shadow of distrust that Michael had never noticed before. "Still working at this hour, my grandson?" asked William, his deep voice filling the room. Michael felt the weight of those words, realizing that he would need to be more cautious than ever. His grandfather had always been a perceptive man, and the slightest slip could compromise his investigation. "Just organizing some reports, Grandpa," he replied, maintaining a casual tone. "The rain made me lose track of time." William walked to the window, observing the storm that was punishing the city. "You know, Michael, I've always admired your dedication to the family business, but sometimes I wonder if you really understand how things work in our world." Those words carried a weight that Michael knew well. It was the same tone his grandfather used when he wanted to establish his authority. Max discreetly positioned himself between the two, as if sensing the growing tension in the room. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The next morning, Michael woke up with his mind still processing the events of the previous night. The discovered will weighed in his pocket like lead, but it was just the beginning of an investigation that promised to reveal even deeper secrets. Sitting at his desk in the main office of Anderson Corporation, he began to connect the dots that had intrigued him for months. Olivia entered the room carrying a stack of documents and a cup of coffee. Her focused expression indicated she had news. "Mr. Anderson, those records you asked for, I found something interesting." She carefully placed the papers on the desk, as if handling precious evidence. "What did you discover, Olivia?" Michael asked, noting the hesitation in her voice. "In the last 18 months, there's been a series of transfers to overseas accounts, all approved by your grandfather, but..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The recipient companies seem not to exist, at least not officially." Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. The suspicions he had cultivated for months were beginning to take concrete form. He took the documents and began to analyze them meticulously. Each page revealed a new, disturbing detail: dubious signatures, inconsistent dates, astronomical amounts, being moved without apparent justification. On his desk, an old photo caught his attention. In it, his mother smiled next to William, in front of the company's first headquarters. It was an image of simpler times, when he believed his grandfather was just a dedicated and visionary businessman. Now, every memory needed to be re-evaluated, from a new perspective. Max, who accompanied him in the office, began to bark softly at the window. Michael approached and saw William entering the building, greeting employees with his usual imposing posture. The patriarch had a meeting scheduled with foreign investors that morning, another of the many negotiations that happened behind closed doors. "Olivia, I need you to do something for me," Michael said, turning to his secretary. "I want all records of my grandfather's meetings for the past 2 years. Times, participants, everything you can find." The secretary nodded, understanding the seriousness of the request. "Mr. Anderson, there's something else you need to know. Sarah from accounting approached me yesterday. She's worried about some entries she was forced to make. She said they're irregular procedures, but your grandfather insisted they be carried out." The information lit a new alert in his mind. Sarah was known for her competence and integrity. If she was worried, the problem was real. Michael began to make notes in his notebook, mapping each new discovery, each confirmed suspicion. The day passed between confidential phone calls and discreet searches in the company's archives. Each new piece of information seemed to lead to an even more complex labyrinth of irregularities. Michael realized he needed to be extremely cautious. His grandfather had eyes and ears in every department. At the end of the afternoon, while most employees had already left, Michael remained in his office analyzing the documents found. Max, always alert, perked up his ears when footsteps approached. It was Sarah, the accountant, looking nervous and constantly glancing over her shoulder. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered, closing the door behind her, "there's something I need to show you, but not here. It's not safe." Michael observed the woman, who had worked for more than 2 decades in the company. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a folder. "Sarah, you can trust me. What's going on?" "Your grandfather. He's been doing things that..." She hesitated, taking a deep breath before continuing. "There's a pattern in the financial movements. It started small years ago, but now, the amounts are huge. And there's more. I found records of shell companies, fake contracts, an entire network of suspicious operations." Max approached Sarah as if wanting to offer comfort. Michael took the folder she extended, feeling the weight of responsibility increase on his shoulders. Inside, he found detailed spreadsheets, transfer receipts, and a list of names he had never seen before. "This could be dangerous," Sarah continued, her voice almost a whisper. "Your grandfather has powerful contacts, people who would do anything to keep these secrets buried." Michael put the documents in his briefcase, along with the will. "I'll protect you, Sarah. You have my word, but I need you to keep acting normally, as if nothing had happened." When Sarah left, Michael remained in his office, watching the sun set through the window. The city below continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding high up in that corporate building. Max rested his head on his knee, offering the silent comfort that only a loyal friend could provide. The week that followed was one of intense discoveries for Michael. Each new document he analyzed revealed a web of irregularities more complex than the previous one. In his office at the company, he maintained an apparently normal routine, but inside, his mind worked incessantly, connecting the pieces of the puzzle that his grandfather had built over the years. That Wednesday morning, Olivia hurriedly entered his office, carefully closing the door behind her. Her face showed concern. "Mr. Anderson, I just discovered something you need to see immediately." She placed her laptop on the desk and opened a series of spreadsheets. "These are the financial movements of the last 5 years. Look at this pattern." Michael leaned over the screen, analyzing the numbers Olivia was pointing to. It was a sophisticated scheme. Small amounts were regularly diverted, scattered across various international accounts. Individually, each transaction seemed insignificant, but when added up, they revealed a millionaire diversion. "How did no one notice this before?" muttered Michael, more to himself than to Olivia. "Because your grandfather always maintained strict control over who had access to this information," she replied, lowering her voice even more. "And those who possibly discovered something, well, they were transferred to other branches or suddenly resigned." Max, who had been lying near the desk, raised his head and let out a small whimper. Michael had already noticed how his dog seemed especially agitated when the subject was William's suspicious activities. It was as if the animal could sense the weight of the discoveries his owner was making. A movement in the hallway caught Michael's attention. Through the frosted glass of his office, he recognized his grandfather's unmistakable silhouette, walking decidedly towards the meeting room. William was accompanied by 2 men Michael had never seen before, foreign executives, judging by their impeccable suits and leather briefcases. "Olivia, find out who these men are with my grandfather," Michael asked, his voice filled with urgency, "and try to access his agenda for the past few months. I need to know who else he's been meeting with." The secretary nodded and quickly left the room. Michael turned his attention to the documents Sarah had given him. Among them, he found contracts with shell companies based in tax havens. Each signature, each stamp, each detail had been meticulously planned to appear legitimate. Max approached Michael, placing his head on his lap as he always did when he sensed him worried. The animal's gesture of affection brought a brief moment of comfort amid the whirlwind of concerns. Michael stroked the dog's head, thinking about how his life had changed since the discovery of the will. The sound of raised voices coming from the meeting room interrupted his thoughts. Michael approached the door, trying to catch something from the discussion. William's voice sounded harsher than usual, and words like deadline and consequences echoed through the corridor. Minutes later, Olivia returned with more information. "The men are executives from a Swiss bank," she explained, consulting her notes. "And it's not the first time they've visited the company. I found records of at least 3 other meetings in the last 2 months." Michael felt his stomach sink. Swiss banks, shell companies, millionaire diversions. The picture forming was increasingly worrying. His grandfather wasn't just manipulating the company's finances, he was building an international scheme of still unknown proportions. "There's one more thing," continued Olivia hesitantly. "I overheard a conversation between 2 directors this morning. It seems your grandfather is planning a complete restructuring of the company. Several long-time employees will be replaced." "He's cleaning house," concluded Michael, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of concern, "removing anyone who might have discovered something or who isn't completely loyal to him." Max barked softly, as if agreeing with his owner's conclusion. Michael approached the window, observing the city that stretched below. The empire built by his family was being corroded from within, and he was possibly the only person who could do something about it. "Olivia, I need you to do one more thing," said Michael, turning to his secretary. "I want you to create backup copies of all these documents. Keep them in a safe place outside the company. And more importantly, don't tell anyone about what we've discovered." As Olivia left to carry out his instructions, Michael thought of his mother. What would she say if she knew that the company she had fought so hard for was being used in this way? The will in his possession was more than a legal document. It was a call to action, a responsibility he could no longer ignore. The Anderson mansion was especially quiet that night, except for the sound of rain that was falling again over Boston. Michael was in his room, spreading all the documents he had collected in the past weeks on the bed. Max watched him attentively, lying near the door like a silent guardian. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Sarah. "Found more records. Meeting tomorrow morning?" Michael responded affirmatively, feeling a mixture of anxiety and apprehension. Each new discovery brought him closer to an inevitable confrontation with his grandfather. A thunder rumbled in the distance when Max suddenly got up, his ears alert. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Michael quickly put the documents in a folder, hiding it under the mattress. The door opened, revealing William Anderson with a somber expression on his face. "We need to talk, Michael," said the patriarch, his voice carrying a tone that the grandson had never heard before. "About your future in the company." Michael gestured for his grandfather to enter, maintaining an apparent calm while his heart raced. Max remained alert, his eyes fixed on William. "Sure, Grandpa. Any problem?" William walked around the room, stopping in front of the window. For a moment he observed the rain in silence. "You look so much like your mother," he began, his voice softening for an instant. "The same determination in your eyes, the same curiosity, and the same tendency to meddle where you shouldn't." The comment made Michael freeze. Did his grandfather know something? Had the investigations been discovered? Maintaining his composure, he replied, "I don't understand what you mean." "Yes, you do." William turned, his eyes hard as steel. "You've been asking questions, Michael. Messing with old files, talking to employees who should keep their mouths shut. This needs to stop." The veiled threat in William's voice was clear. Michael felt Max approach, positioning himself protectively by his side. "The company is also my responsibility, Grandpa. I have the right to understand how things work." "Responsibility?" William laughed, a humorless sound. "You're just a boy born with a silver spoon in your mouth. You have no idea what it takes to keep an empire running, the decisions that need to be made, the necessary compromises." "Compromises?" Michael couldn't contain the indignation in his voice. "Is that what you call diverting money from the company? Creating shell companies, forging documents?" William's face paled for a second before being taken by contained fury. "Be careful what you say, my grandson. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." Max let out a low growl, sensing the growing tension in the room. William cast a look of contempt at the animal before continuing. "Tomorrow there will be a board meeting. I'm going to announce some changes in the company's structure. You will be transferred to our Singapore branch." "You can't do that," Michael protested, his voice firm. "You don't have that right." "I have all the rights," William cut off, his voice sharp. "I'm the chairman of the board, the only one with authority to make decisions in this company, and you, my dear grandson, will learn to respect that." Michael felt the weight of the will hidden under his mattress. Was it time to reveal its existence? Before he could decide, William continued, "And as for your secretary and that nosy accountant, well, they'll also receive new professional challenges in very distant places." The implicit threat made Michael's blood boil. "Leave them out of this. They have nothing to do with it." "They have everything to do with it," William replied, walking towards the door. "Every person in that company owes me absolute loyalty. Those who forget that need to be reallocated." When William left, slamming the door behind him. Michael collapsed on the bed. Max immediately approached, offering the comfort of his presence. The young man hugged the dog, his mind working frantically. He needed to act quickly. He took his cell phone and sent messages to Olivia and Sarah, warning them about the danger. Then he began to photograph each document he had collected, sending the images to a secure email. He couldn't risk losing the evidence that had cost so much to gather. The rain continued falling outside, but Michael barely noticed it anymore. His mind was focused on a single goal. He needed to expose the truth before his grandfather destroyed more lives. The Anderson Empire had been built with the sweat of generations, and he would not allow it to be tainted by greed and corruption. The morning arrived with a fine, persistent drizzle, typical of Boston. Michael hadn't managed to sleep well, his mind constantly replaying the tense conversation with William. By his side, Max had also remained alert throughout the night, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. Before leaving for the company, Michael made one last check of the documents. His mother's will was safe, along with all the other evidence he had collected. He sent a message to Olivia, confirming that she had stored the backup copies in a secure location. "Take care of the house, buddy," he said to Max, who was watching him with attentive eyes. The dog let out a small whine, as if protesting against the idea of being left behind. "I need you to stay here today. I have a feeling you might be more useful at the mansion." Upon arriving at Anderson Corporation, the atmosphere was different. Employees whispered in the corridors, casting apprehensive glances in his direction. News of the board meeting had spread, and everyone seemed to be expecting big changes. Sarah was waiting for him in his office, her face showing that she hadn't slept much better than he had. "Mr. Anderson, I discovered something else," she said as soon as he closed the door. "Your grandfather isn't just diverting money. He's preparing a major operation to transfer control of the company to a foreign group." Michael felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean?" "I found draft contracts," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "William is negotiating the sale of 60% of the shares to a Swiss conglomerate. But it's not a common sale, it's all structured in a way to keep control in his hands through offshore companies." At that moment, Olivia hurriedly entered the office. "The Swiss executives just arrived," she informed, breathless. "And there's more. Mr. Johnson, from legal, is preparing documents for an extraordinary assembly. It looks like your grandfather wants to accelerate the whole process." Michael stood up, feeling the weight of the decision he needed to make. "The board meeting is in an hour. We need to act now." He took his cell phone and dialed a number he had kept for emergencies. "Hello, Detective Carter? This is Michael Anderson. Remember we talked about possible irregularities in the company? I need your help." After a brief conversation, Michael hung up the phone and turned to Sarah and Olivia. "You two need to leave the company now. Go home and wait for my contact. Things might get complicated here." "I won't leave you alone," Olivia protested, her loyalty evident in her voice. "We need you safe," Michael insisted. "You are my most important witnesses. If something goes wrong today, you'll be the only ones who can tell the true story." Reluctantly, the two women agreed to leave. As soon as he was alone, Michael began to organize his thoughts. He had only an hour to prevent his grandfather from destroying his family's legacy. His cell phone vibrated. It was a message from the mansion's caretaker. "Mr. Anderson, your dog is acting strangely. He won't stop barking near your grandfather's office." Shiver ran down his spine. Max always had a sixth sense for trouble. "Keep an eye on him," he quickly replied, "and let me know if he finds anything." The next few minutes were dedicated to preparing his strategy. Michael knew he would need to be precise in his accusations. He organized the documents in chronological order, preparing to expose each irregularity discovered. When there were 15 minutes left before the meeting, another employee entered his office. It was Martinez, one of the company's oldest directors. "Michael, we need to talk," he said, closing the door. "Your grandfather is not thinking clearly anymore. His decisions in recent months have been increasingly risky." "Did you know something, Martinez?" The director ran his hand over his tired face. "I suspected, but William was always very skilled at compartmentalizing information. No one had the complete picture, until now." Michael studied the face of the man he had known since childhood. "I need your support on the board." "Today." "You'll have it," Martinez assured. "Other directors are also concerned, but Michael, your grandfather won't back down easily. He has a lot to lose." A new text from the caretaker interrupted the conversation. "Mr. Anderson, Max found something in the garden. He's frantically digging near the fountain." Michael felt his heart race. The fountain, the same place where his mother used to spend hours reading before she passed away. "Send photos of what he finds," he quickly replied. The clock marked 5 minutes to the meeting when the photos arrived. Michael almost dropped his cell phone when he saw the images. Max had unearthed a small metal box, and inside it were more documents, some already yellowed by time. The boardroom was full when Michael entered. William already occupied his position, at the head of the table, emanating his usual aura of authority. The Swiss executives were seated to his right, while the other board members and directors filled the other places. "Ah, my grandson," William smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I was about to start without you. We have important decisions to make today." Michael took his place, feeling the weight of the documents in his briefcase. His cell phone vibrated silently. More photos from the caretaker. Max had found old company records, including what appeared to be his mother's diary. He needed to buy time. "Before we begin," Michael spoke up, his voice firm, "I'd like to discuss some recent discoveries about the company's financial management." William tapped the table softly. "We have a defined agenda, Michael. Your inconcerns can wait for another time." "No, they can't, Grandpa." Michael stood up, beginning to distribute copies of the documents he had gathered. "Over the past few months, I've discovered a series of irregularities that need to be explained." The Swiss executives looked at each other, uneasy. William maintained his neutral expression, but his fingers drummed on the table, a sign of nervousness that Michael knew well. "These are proofs of systematic resource diversions," Michael continued, pointing to the documents. "Shell companies, fraudulent contracts, suspicious international transfers, and now I've discovered that there's an attempt to sell control of the company through an elaborate offshore scheme." "This is ridiculous," William stood up, his voice thundering. "My grandson is clearly disturbed. These accusations are absurd." Martinez cleared his throat, drawing attention. "With all due respect, Mr. Anderson, the documents seem quite consistent. As financial director, I'd like to better understand these operations." Michael's cell phone vibrated again. The new photos showed pages from his mother's diary, where she detailed her suspicions about irregular operations in the company. She had discovered something years ago. "There's more," Michael continued. "I've just received evidence that these practices didn't start recently. My mother had already identified similar problems years ago." The mention of his daughter made William pale slightly. The Swiss executives began to whisper among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the meeting. "And there's also this," Michael took out his mother's will, "a document that should have been presented 2 years ago when I turned 5, a will that guaranteed me control of the company." The silence that followed was deafening. William looked at the document as if he were seeing a ghost. The older board members began to murmur among themselves. "This is a desperate attempt by an immature boy to take control of something he doesn't understand." William tried to regain control of the situation. "These supposed pieces of evidence mean nothing." At this moment, the door to the room opened. Detective Carter entered, accompanied by 2 investigators. "They mean enough for a formal investigation, Mr. Anderson," said the police officer, his grave voice filling the room. William looked at the police officers, then at his grandson, his expression changing from anger to something close to despair. "You don't understand, Michael," he said, his voice lower. "Everything I did was to protect the company. The business world is cruel. We need to adapt." "Adaptation is different from corruption, Grandpa," Michael replied, feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. "The company that my mother loved, that generations of our family built, deserves more than this." The investigators began to collect the documents while Detective Carter approached William. The Anderson patriarch seemed to have aged decades in a few minutes. "Mr. Anderson," said the detective, "we need you to come with us to provide some clarifications." The Swiss executive stood up, clearly anxious to distance themselves from the situation. Martinez and other directors remained seated, observing the scene with a mixture of shock and relief. Michael received another message from the caretaker. Max had stopped digging and was now sitting calmly next to the fountain, as if his mission had been accomplished. Somehow his faithful companion had helped unearth not just documents, but all the truth that his mother had tried to reveal years ago. The news of William Anderson's arrest spread like wildfire through the company. The corridors, once filled with whispers and suspicious glances, now overflowed with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Michael observed everything from his office, trying to process the events of the last few hours while dealing with a flood of calls and messages. The fee. "Journalists won't stop calling," Olivia informed, having returned to the company as soon as she heard about the outcome of the meeting. "And the shareholders are in panic. The stock value has already dropped 15% since the news leaked." Michael massaged his temples, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "We need to organize a press conference today. Transparency will be our best defense now." Martinez entered the room carrying a thick folder of documents. "Michael, the legal team finished the preliminary analysis. The scheme is much bigger than we imagined. There are ramifications in at least 5 different countries." "And the employees?" asked Michael, his concern evident. "How are they reacting?" "Scared, mostly," Martinez replied. "Many fear losing their jobs. Others are worried about being implicated in the investigations, even without having actively participated in the schemes." A message from the caretaker interrupted the conversation. "Mr. Anderson, we found more documents in the mansion's office. Max won't stop sniffing a specific area behind the bookcase." "I'm going there," Michael decided, standing up. "Olivia, organize the press conference for 5 p.m. Martinez, gather the main directors. We need to align our discourse and demonstrate that the company remains solid despite everything." Upon arriving at the mansion, Michael found Max still on alert, focused on a wooden panel behind the old bookcase in the office. The caretaker had already moved some furniture, revealing what appeared to be a disguised opening. "He started scratching here right after the police left," explained the caretaker, pointing to the marks left by Max's paws. Carefully, Michael examined the panel, finding a discreet opening mechanism. Inside the secret compartment, there was an old safe, different from the modern one his grandfather normally used. "We need a specialist to open this," Michael muttered, but Max had other ideas. The dog began to bark at a painting on the opposite wall, a portrait of his mother. Michael approached the painting, carefully removing it. Behind it, written in small handwriting, was a sequence of numbers. "Impossible," he whispered, turning to the safe. The combination worked. Inside, he found an even more revealing set of documents, detailed records of irregular operations dating back 2 decades, compromising correspondences, and, most surprisingly, letters written by his mother. "Dear Michael," one of them began, dated a few months before her passing. "If you're reading this, it means my suspicions were correct. Your grandfather has transformed our company into something it should never have been. I tried to confront him, show him another path, but he's blinded by ambition." The reading was interrupted by a call from Olivia. "Mr. Anderson, we have a problem. The Swiss executives are threatening to file a lawsuit claiming they were deceived, and the press has discovered about secret accounts in tax havens." Michael looked at Max, who maintained his vigilant posture. "Schedule a meeting with our legal team for an hour from now, and call Sarah too. We need her to track all suspicious transactions." As he carefully stored his mother's letters, Michael realized that the battle was far from over. William's arrest was just the beginning. Now he needed to clean up the company's name and regain the trust of employees, shareholders, and partners. "Come on, buddy," he called Max, who immediately positioned himself by his side. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." On the way back to the company, Michael reread excerpts from his mother's letters. Each word revealed not only the extent of William's corruption, but also the pain of a daughter who saw her father lose himself in a labyrinth of greed and power. The press conference would be in a few hours. Michael knew he would need to find a delicate balance, being transparent about the problems discovered without causing even more damage to the company's reputation. Thousands of jobs depended on how he would handle this crisis. A new message from Sarah arrived. "I just discovered 3 more shell companies linked to the scheme, all headquartered in the Cayman Islands." The day was far from over, and each new discovery brought more complexity to the puzzle that Michael needed to solve. But something had changed. Now he was no longer alone in this battle. He had by his side people committed to truth and justice, as well as his faithful 4-legged companion, whose extraordinary intuition had helped uncover secrets buried for so long. The conference room of Anderson Corporation was packed with journalists when Michael took his place at the table. Cameras flashed incessantly, and the buzz of conversations ceased as soon as he prepared to speak. Beside him, Martinez and the legal team offered silent support. "Good afternoon, everyone," Michael began, his voice firm despite the pressure of the moment. "We are here today to address the recent discoveries involving the previous management of Anderson Corporation. First, I want to make clear our commitment to transparency and integrity." While Michael conducted the press conference, Max remained in his office on the upper floor, guarding the newly discovered documents. Olivia had insisted that the dog stay upstairs. "He has a sixth sense for trouble," she had argued. "The company is fully cooperating with the authorities," Michael continued. "We will implement a new corporate governance and compliance system, ensuring that situations like this never happen again." The journalists' questions came like arrows. "How did you not notice before? What is the amount diverted? Were other executives involved?" Michael answered each one with caution and honesty, following Martinez's advice to be transparent, without compromising the ongoing investigations. After the press conference back in his office, Michael was receiving constant updates from the team. Sarah had mapped out more ramifications of the scheme, while Olivia coordinated a task, forced to respond to shareholders' concerns. "The employees are calmer," Martinez informed, entering the room. "Your commitment to transparency made a good impression, but international investors are still wary." Max, who had remained alert throughout the day, suddenly perked up his ears. Determined footsteps echoed through the corridor. It was Helen Johnson, the company's oldest lawyer, carrying a folder. "Michael," she began without preamble, "I found something you need to see. These are documents from when your mother was legal director. The papers revealed that his mother had initiated a discreet internal investigation years ago. She had discovered the first irregularities and tried to confront William, but something prevented her from taking the case further. There's more," Helen continued. "Your mother left detailed records of all the suspicious operations she identified. It was her insurance. If anything happened to her, the truth would come out." Michael felt a lump in his throat. His mother had not only discovered the corruption, but had also prepared to expose it. The will, the letters, the hidden documents. Everything was part of a larger plan. "We need to use this information wisely," Helen pondered. "It can help with the investigations, but it can also cause more damage to the company's reputation if not managed correctly." Max approached Michael, offering his silent support as he always did in difficult moments. The young executive stroked the animal's head while organizing his thoughts. "We're going to do this right," Michael decided. "Full transparency with the authorities, but with a careful communication plan to protect the employees and the company." The following hours were dedicated to elaborating a restructuring strategy. Michael gathered the main directors, establishing working groups for different aspects of the crisis: governance, communication, legal, and operational. "The priority is to preserve jobs," he emphasized during the meeting. "We'll cut costs where possible, but without layoffs. This company was built by dedicated people who can't pay for one person's mistake." As night fell over Boston, Michael remained in his office, reviewing documents with Max faithfully by his side. The dog occasionally looked out the window, as if keeping watch against invisible threats. A new message arrived. It was from Detective Carter. "William's interrogation revealed more connections. We need your help to identify some companies." Michael sighed, preparing for another long night of work. The task of rebuilding his family's legacy would be arduous, but he wasn't alone. He had by his side a committed team, the truth as a guide, and of course his inseparable four-legged companion, whose loyalty and intuition had been fundamental in unraveling the entire plot. "You know, Max," he said, breaking the silence of the office, "Mom always said that the truth has a way of coming out no matter how long it takes. So I think she would be proud to see that we finally managed to do the right thing." Max responded with a soft bark of approval, while the city lights twinkled outside, promising a new dawn for Anderson Corporation. A week had passed since William's Arrest and the Anderson mansion seemed different under the morning sunlight. Michael walked through the corridors, observing the family portraits that adorned the walls. Each photograph now told a different story, revealing layers of secrets he had never noticed before. Max followed him faithfully, occasionally stopping to sniff certain areas of the house. The dog's behavior had changed since the discoveries. It was as if he knew that his mission of exposing the truth was only partially complete. "Mr. Anderson," called the caretaker, approaching hurriedly. "We found something else while cleaning the attic. I think you'll want to see this." In the dusty attic environment, among old boxes and furniture covered by sheets, there was a trunk that Michael had never seen before. The lock was rusty, but the key still worked. Inside, he found photo albums and old diaries, not from his mother, but from his grandmother, Elizabeth Anderson. "Dear Diary," began an entry from 25 years ago. "William is changing. Business consumes him more and more, and I fear he's losing his humanity in the process. Helen tried to warn him today about some irregularities, but he dismissed her coldly. Our daughter is worried, and rightly so." Michael sat in an old armchair, absorbing every word. Max settled at his feet, attentive as always. The diary pages revealed a much more complex family history than he had imagined. His grandmother had noticed the changes in William years before anyone else. "Mr. Anderson," Olivia interrupted his thoughts, climbing the attic stairs. "I'm sorry, but we have a situation at the company. The auditors found something worrying." In the office of Anderson Corporation, the audit team had discovered a new set of suspicious transactions. Unlike the previous schemes, these seemed to have a unique pattern. They all involved a specific company in Switzerland. "Winterthur Holdings," explained Sarah, showing the documents. "It started appearing in the company's records exactly 23 years ago, right after—" She hesitated, looking at Michael with concern. "Right after what, Sarah?" "Right after your parents' car accident," she completed softly. Michael felt his blood run cold. He had always believed that the loss of his parents had been a twist of fate, but now a new somber possibility presented itself. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Winterthur Holdings was registered by a Swiss lawyer named Klaus Weber, and we found old correspondences between him and your grandfather dating from before the accident." Max, who had accompanied Michael to the company, began to bark at a specific folder on the desk. Michael opened it, finding old photographs. In one of them, he recognized his grandfather next to a tall, blonde man. The photo had a note on the back. "William and Klaus, St. Moritz, 1999. Olivia, I need you to contact Detective Carter immediately," Michael ordered. "And Martinez. Gather all the documents we have on Winterthur Holdings, every contract, every transfer, every email." While the team worked, Michael turned his attention to his grandmother's diary. The entries close to the time of the accident revealed more disturbing details. Elizabeth had noticed changes in William's behavior, secret meetings, mysterious late-night phone calls. "My God," whispered Helen, who had just entered the room. "I remember Klaus Weber. He was here several times back then. Your mother never trusted him, Michael. In fact, she was investigating his activities when—" The phrase hung in the air, loaded with terrible implications. Max approached Michael, resting his head on his knee as he always did in the most difficult moments. A new message arrived from Detective Carter. "William agreed to collaborate. He wants to talk, but only with you present." Michael looked at the photograph in his hands, then at his grandmother's diary, and finally at Max. His faithful companion stared at him with those wise eyes that seemed to understand everything. "Prepare the documentation," he instructed the team. "I'm going to visit my grandfather in prison. It's time to know the whole truth, no matter how painful it may be." As he prepared to leave, Michael couldn't help but think about how each revelation seemed to open a new box of secrets. The story of his family, which already seemed complex, was about to reveal its darkest layers. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. The detention center where William was being held was an austere building on the outskirts of Boston. Michael waited in the visiting room, the revelations of the past few days weighing on his mind. Max had stayed at the mansion, but before leaving, the dog had shown unusual restlessness, as if sensing the importance of this meeting. William entered the room escorted by 2 agents. His haughty bearing had disappeared, replaced by a fragility that Michael had never imagined seeing in his grandfather. His eyes, once penetrating and domineering, now carried a mixture of tiredness and something that seemed to be remorse. "You found your grandmother's diary," said William, not as a question but as a statement, "and Winterthur Holdings." "Why, Grandpa?" Michael's voice came out more controlled than he expected. "Why all this scheme? Why hide Mom's will? Why everything?" William completed, letting out a heavy sigh. "The truth, Michael, is that I lost control a long time ago. It started as something small, some side deals, some undeclared accounts. It was to protect the company, I told myself. But then you met Klaus Weber," Michael completed. William nodded slowly. "Klaus had connections, knew powerful people. He promised to expand our business internationally, open doors that seemed impossible. Your mother, Helen. She discovered some irregularities in the operations with Winterthur. Did she try to confront you about it?" "Several times," William admitted, his voice breaking. "She was like you, Michael, honest, determined to do the right thing. When she threatened to expose everything..." He stopped, the words seeming to choke in his throat. Michael felt his heart race. "The accident. It wasn't an accident, was it?" William covered his face with his hands, his shoulders trembling. "Klaus said he would just talk to her, convince her to back down. I never imagined, never wanted..." His voice failed completely. "You let that man just silence my mother." Michael's voice was filled with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "When I found out what happened, it was too late. Klaus had evidence against me, documents that would incriminate me. I became a prisoner of my own mistakes, Michael. Each year that passed, each new scheme was like sinking deeper into quicksand." Michael stood up, unable to continue sitting. "And the will? Why hide it?" "Fear," William answered, simply. "Fear that you would discover everything, that you would investigate the past as your mother did. Fear of facing the truth of my actions." "Where is Klaus Weber now?" "Switzerland, probably. But I have all the evidence against him, Michael. I kept every document, every recording as my own insurance. They're in a safe in Geneva." Michael felt his phone vibrate. It was a message from Olivia. "Urgent. Detective Carter managed to locate Klaus Weber. He's trying to leave Switzerland. I'm going to tell Detective Carter everything," William continued, his voice firmer now. "About Klaus, about Winterthur, about everything. I can't bring your mother back, Michael, but I can at least ensure that justice is done." "Why now, Grandpa? Why decide to tell the truth?" William looked into his grandson's eyes for the first time since he entered the room. "Because I saw in you the same determination I saw in your mother. When you started investigating, when you faced all the threats, I realized I was seeing Helen again, and I realized I couldn't allow history to repeat itself." Michael received another message, this time from the caretaker. "Max found something else in the office. A letter addressed to you, written by your grandmother shortly before she passed away. There's one more thing you need to know," said William. "Your grandmother, Elizabeth, she discovered about Klaus weeks after the accident. The diary you found doesn't tell everything. She confronted Klaus, threatened to expose him. The illness that took her, it wasn't natural either." Michael felt the weight of 2 decades of lies and tragedies crashing down on his shoulders. His mother, his grandmother, 2 strong women who tried to fight against corruption and paid the ultimate price for it. "I'll do what they couldn't finish," said Michael, his voice filled with determination. "I'll expose Klaus Weber and everyone involved. I'll clear our company's name and transform it into what it should have been from the beginning." William nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud, Michael, and forgive me, I know I don't deserve it, but..." "Forgiveness will take time, Grandpa," Michael replied, standing up. But the truth is a beginning. Back at the mansion, Michael found Max exactly where the caretaker had said, in the office, sitting patiently next to the old desk. On the furniture, a letter yellowed by back at the mansion, Michael found Max exactly where the caretaker had said, in the office, sitting patiently next to the old desk. On the furniture, a letter yellowed by time awaited his reading. His grandmother Elizabeth's elegant handwriting filled several pages, telling a story he had never imagined. "My dear grandson," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you've finally discovered the truth about our family. I couldn't protect your mother, my beloved Helen, but I can at least leave this record so you understand what really happened." Max approached, resting his head on Michael's lap as he read. The letter revealed how Elizabeth had connected the dots after losing her daughter, how she had discovered Klaus Weber's manipulations and William's involvement, how she had tried to gather evidence to expose the truth. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman, Michael," the letter continued. "She discovered the irregularities in the company and refused to be part of it. Helen believed that a family business should be built on solid values, not on lies and corruption." Olivia entered the office silently, carrying a folder. "Sorry to interrupt, but Detective Carter just sent this. These are the records of Klaus Weber's latest movements." Michael gestured for her to sit down. "Look at this, Olivia. My grandmother documented everything." He passed some pages of the letter to her. "She investigated Klaus for months, discovered his connections to criminal organizations in Europe." "This explains a lot," Olivia replied, leafing through the documents she had brought. "Weber is trying to transfer a huge amount of money from his Swiss accounts to a bank in the Cayman Islands." Max barked softly, as if wanting to draw attention to something. The dog headed to a specific bookshelf, the same one where days before they had found the secret compartment. Michael followed him, intrigued. "Wait a moment." He examined the structure of the bookshelf again, discovering a second hidden compartment. Inside, he found an old pen drive and more documents. "Your grandmother thought of everything," Olivia commented admiringly as they connected the pen drive to the laptop. "These are digitized copies of all of Klaus's operation records, including emails and conversation recordings." Sarah hurriedly entered the office. "Michael, I just received a call from our Geneva branch. Someone tried to access the safe your grandfather kept in the Swiss bank." "Klaus," Michael muttered. "He must be desperate to destroy the evidence." Max started barking more intensely, running to the window. Outside, rain began to fall again over Boston, creating an atmosphere reminiscent of the night when everything began. "Olivia, contact Detective Carter immediately," Michael instructed. "Sarah, I need you to coordinate with our international legal team. We're going to prevent Klaus from destroying this evidence." As the two left to carry out their tasks, Michael turned his attention back to his grandmother's letter. The last pages revealed not only her investigation, but also her hopes for the future. "You have your mother's strength and my determination, Michael," read the end of the letter. "I know that when the time comes, you'll do the right thing. The true legacy of the Andersons isn't in bank vaults or corporate contracts. It's in the values your mother defended to the end." Max approached again, his attentive eyes fixed on Michael. The animal always seemed to have a special connection to the family's history, as if he were a guardian designated to help reveal the truth. "She was right about everything, buddy." Michael spoke to Max, stroking his head. "Mom and Grandma didn't fight in vain. Now it's our turn to finish what they started." His cell phone rang. It was Detective Carter. "Michael, we have Klaus Weber's exact location. He's in a hotel in Geneva preparing to flee. The Swiss authorities are ready to act, but we need the evidence your grandfather mentioned." Michael looked at the documents spread out on the desk. At the pen drive his grandmother had left, and at Max, his faithful companion throughout this journey. Each piece of the puzzle was finally fitting together. "I'll send everything right now, Detective," he replied. "Klaus Weber won't escape, not after everything he did to my family." The rain continued to fall outside, but this time Michael no longer felt the weight of uncertainty. The women in his family had left a legacy of courage and integrity, and now it was up to him to honor that legacy, bringing to light all the truth they had fought so hard to reveal. The next 24 hours unfolded in a whirlwind of events. The office of Anderson Corporation had been transformed into an operations center, with Michael coordinating simultaneous actions in several countries. Max remained by his side as always, his presence a constant source of comfort amid the chaos. The Swiss authorities have just confirmed, Olivia announced, entering the meeting room where the team was gathered. Klaus Weber was detained while trying to board a private jet. They found a briefcase full of documents he was trying to destroy. Martinez, who was coordinating communication with the international offices, added, "Our lawyers in Geneva managed to block all accounts linked to Winterthur Holdings. The money isn't going anywhere." Michael observed the digital map on the main screen, where red dots indicated each location involved in the operation. Geneva, Cayman Islands, Singapore, Klaus's scheme was truly international. "Mr. Anderson," Sarah called, looking up from her laptop. "I just received the files from the Swiss safe. They're impressive. Klaus kept detailed records of all illegal operations from the last 25 years. Max, who had been lying quietly until then, suddenly stood up, his ears alert. Seconds. Later, Detective Carter entered the room carrying a thick folder. "We have Klaus Weber's full confession," he announced. "After we showed him the evidence you gathered, he decided to collaborate. He told everything about..." The detective hesitated, looking at Michael with concern. "About my mother and my grandmother," Michael completed, his voice firm despite the pain. "You can speak, Detective. We need the whole truth to come out." Weber confessed to organizing the accident that killed your parents, and he admitted to poisoning your grandmother when she started investigating him. He maintained a network of contacts specialized in making things look like accidents or natural causes. The room fell silent. Max approached Michael, offering his silent support as he always did in the most difficult moments. The young executive took a deep breath, processing the confirmation of his worst suspicions. "There's one more thing," the detective continued. "Weber was planning something similar for you. After you started investigating the company, he had hired people to, well, make it look like an accident." Michael felt a chill as he remembered the night Max had started acting strangely, barking at shadows in the garden. His faithful companion had probably sensed the presence of the men hired by Klaus. "The documents from the Swiss safe are our last piece of the key puzzle," explained the detective. "With them, we can not only prove all the financial crimes, but also establish the connection with the incidents in your family." Olivia, who had been analyzing the newly arrived files, drew everyone's attention. "I found something interesting here. It seems Klaus kept a video diary. There are recordings of him discussing all the schemes with your grandfather, Michael." The main screen in the room now showed excerpts from the recordings. William Anderson appeared in several of them, younger, discussing illegal operations with Klaus. In one specific recording, they were talking about Helen, Michael's mother. "She won't back down, William," Klaus said in the video. "Your daughter is too stubborn, too idealistic. You know what needs to be done." Michael looked away from the screen, unable to continue watching. Max rested his head on his knee, and he found comfort in the simple gesture of his companion. "What happens now?" Martinez asked, breaking the heavy silence that had settled. "Now," Michael replied, standing up, "we're going to rebuild everything. Not just the company, but my family's legacy. We're going to transform Anderson Corporation into what my mother and grandmother always dreamed it would be." Detective Carter nodded with approval. "Klaus Weber and all his accomplices will face justice. Your grandfather, well, his collaboration will be taken into consideration, but he'll also have to answer for his actions." "The press already knows about the arrests in Switzerland," Olivia informed. "We need to prepare for another wave of media attention." Michael walked to the window, observing the city stretching below. Max followed him, always vigilant. The sun was beginning to set over Boston, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, an appropriate ending for a day that marked the closure of a dark chapter in the Anderson history. 3 months had passed since Klaus Weber's arrest. Anderson Corporation was different, not just in its organizational structure, but in its essence. Michael had implemented profound changes, transforming the company into a model of corporate governance and transparency. On that spring morning, he walked through the company corridors alongside Max, greeting employees who now worked in a renewed environment. Fear and distrust had given way to a sense of shared purpose. The numbers for the first quarter after the restructuring have arrived, Olivia announced, entering his office with a folder of reports, and they're surprisingly positive. Michael smiled, not surprised. People trust transparent companies more, Olivia. That's what my mother always said. Max, lying in his usual spot near the window, raised his head when Sarah entered the room carrying her laptop. I finished implementing the new compliance system, she informed. Now each transaction goes through 3 levels of verification before being approved. Excellent, Michael replied. How's the social project we discussed going? The Helen Anderson Institute is ready to start its activities, Olivia said, consulting her notes. The Elderly Support Center already has more than 100 enrollees, and the Stray Animal Rescue Program is in its final implementation phase. Michael approached the window, observing the city. The decision to transform part of the assets recovered from Klaus's schemes into social projects had been a way to honor the memory of his mother and grandmother. Mr. Anderson, Martinez called, entering the room. The Swiss authorities have just confirmed. All Winterthur Holdings accounts have been officially blocked and the resources will be repatriated. Max got up and went to the door where Detective Carter had just arrived. The police officer, who had become a close ally in recent months, brought news about the ongoing processes. Klaus Weber has been sentenced to 30 years in prison, he informed, and he agreed to testify against his entire network of international collaborators. As for your grandfather, the detective paused. His collaboration was fundamental in dismantling the scheme. The judge will take this into consideration in the sentence. Michael nodded, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. William, despite his crimes, had chosen the path of redemption in the end. In recent weeks, he had been actively cooperating with the investigations, helping to unravel schemes that extended for decades. We found this in Klaus's old office in Geneva, the detective continued, handing an envelope to Michael. We thought you should see it. Inside the envelope was an old photo, Helen, his mother, still young, smiling next to Elizabeth, his grandmother. On the back, a note, "The women who dared to challenge the system." Max approached, studying the photograph with his attentive eyes. Michael couldn't help but smile. His faithful companion always seemed to know when a moment was significant. Oh, and there's one more thing, Olivia added, picking up a newspaper. Anderson Corporation has been chosen as a case study by Harvard University. They want to document our transformation from a traditional family business to a model of ethical and sustainable management. Your mother and grandmother would be proud, Sarah commented softly. Michael stroked Max's head, remembering how it all began, with a persistent dog sniffing out secrets long buried. They didn't fight in vain, he said. Now it's up to us to continue their legacy. The day continued with meetings and important decisions. The company was preparing to launch a trainee program focused on young people from underprivileged communities, something Helen had always advocated for. Each new initiative was a small tribute to the women who had sacrificed everything for the truth. At the end of the afternoon, while most employees had already left, Michael remained in his office with Max. The dog rested peacefully as if feeling that his mission was accomplished. The company he had helped save was now an example of integrity and social responsibility. You know, Max, Michael spoke, breaking the silence, sometimes I wonder if you weren't a gift from them, a guardian sent to ensure that the truth would come to light. Max raised his head, his intelligent eyes fixed on his owner. Outside, the sun was setting over Boston, painting the sky with shades of hope, exactly as Helen and Elizabeth would have wished to see. A gentle, late afternoon breeze blew through the gardens of the Anderson Mansion, now transformed into the headquarters of the Helen Anderson Institute. Michael walked through the renovated corridors, observing how each space had been adapted to serve a new purpose. Max, always by his side, seemed to approve of the changes with his serene gaze. William's old office, once a symbol of power and secrets, was now a community library. On the walls, photographs told the story of the Anderson family women, Helen and Elizabeth, eternalized in moments of joy and determination. "Mr. Anderson," called the Institute's new administrator, "the first results of the outreach program are impressive. We've already assisted over 200 elderly people and rescued 50 dogs from the streets." Michael smiled, satisfied. The decision to transform the mansion into a social support center had been a way to give new meaning to the space. Where dark secrets once dwelled, stories of hope and new beginnings now flourished. Olivia, who continued to be his right hand in both the company and the Institute, approached with a folder of documents. "I just received the latest updates on the case. Klaus Weber has begun serving his sentence in Switzerland, and all diverted resources have been recovered." Max, who was sniffing near one of the old bookshelves, barked softly. Michael approached, curious. His companion still maintained the habit of finding interesting things. Behind some books there was a yellowed envelope they had never seen before. "Another discovery from our canine detective," Olivia joked as Michael carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a letter written by his mother dated a few days before the accident. "Dear Michael, if you're reading this, it means Max has fulfilled his mission. Yes, son. I always knew that one day you would need a special guardian, someone who would help you discover the truth. That's why I left instructions that, when the time came, you would find this unique companion." Michael felt tears forming in his eyes. Max approached, resting his head on his knee as he always did in important moments. Now everything made sense. The dog's extraordinary intuition, his persistence in investigating certain places, his unwavering loyalty. "Your mother thought of everything," Olivia commented, moved, "even ensuring that you would have the right support when you needed it." The sound of children's laughter invaded the environment. It was time for the reading session for neighborhood children, one of the Institute's many activities. Max immediately perked up. He loved participating in these moments, letting the Edai children pet his golden fur while listening to stories. "Let's go, buddy," Michael called. "We have a special story to tell today." In the reading room, decorated with cheerful colors and comfortable cushions, a group of children eagerly awaited. Max settled in the center of the circle, as if knowing he was a fundamental part of the narrative. "Today I'm going to tell you a story about courage," Michael began, "about two extraordinary women who fought for the truth, and about a very special dog who helped reveal important secrets." The children listened fascinated as Michael narrated an adapted version of the events of the past few months. Max occasionally perked up his ears or barked softly, as if wanting to add his own comments to the story. "And do you know what we learned from all this?" Michael asked the attentive group. "That a family's true treasure isn't in safes or bank accounts. It's in the values we pass on, in the courage to do the right thing, and in the love we share." After the reading session, Michael and Max walked to the garden. The fountain, where it all began, was now surrounded by colorful flowers and welcoming benches, where the Institute's elderly often gathered to chat. "Thank you, buddy," Michael spoke softly to Max, "for being exactly the guardian my mother knew I would need." The sun was setting on the Boston horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The Anderson mansion, once a place of shadows and secrets, now radiated light and hope. It was a new chapter not just for the family, but for the entire community. Max barked cheerfully at a group of passing children, their dog tails wagging in unison. Michael smiled, thinking about how happy his mother and grandmother would be to see what their courage had inspired, a legacy of truth, justice, and compassion that would continue through generations.